Okay, well I'm going to talk about something that came out a few weeks ago called the Open Blue Dragon CFML debugger. It's a debugger for Open Blue Dragon. So like I said, it's not entertaining like beer, but you know, it might be something you would use because you wrote code while you were drinking beer, perhaps. So it's a handy tool. So yeah, I'm talking too fast. I need beer. Well, okay, so first thing is bugs are a fact of life, right? As coders, we may not run into this original bug, the moth in the relay, which probably its programmers will know was the original bug and where the word bug came from. But still, we write code, we do the best we can, but we always wind up with bugs, and therefore debugging is important, no matter how you end up doing it. Traditional debugging methods are kind of messy, right? You do cf dump, you do cf import, that's just kind of how we debug our code. There are debuggers out there, I'll talk about those in a second, or in about 20 seconds actually, but you know, traditionally, we're all used to doing it that way. It gets the job done, and you know, it kind of works. So what's wrong with that approach? Well, it's messy. You end up putting code in your code that has nothing to do with your application running. Okay, so you have this stuff littered everywhere. We've all put code out there and forgotten to take a dump in an abort out that's in a conditional, so it doesn't happen until a certain state is reached in a production environment, and then all of a sudden, hey, the app stops here and I see something nasty. So, okay, so there are CFML debuggers. A lot of people probably use them. There's Fusion Debug, and there's the CF8 debugger for Eclipse, and the debugger that's in Cold Fusion Builder, obviously. So there are debuggers out there. A lot of people use them. They're kind of handy. But more than not, when I talk to people, they don't use them. So I like to gather information. I say, well, why don't you use CFML debuggers? For a lot of people, either they're not on Eclipse, and the ones that are out there are largely Eclipse-based, or they're confusing. You know, this is a debugger so easy that I can talk about other random stuff for 6 minutes, 40 seconds, and probably still figure out how to use it. But if it's confusing, a lot of people just don't take the time to figure it out. So it has to be a better way. Simple is good, complex is bad, right? With some of the overhead involved with getting these things set up, particularly if you don't use Eclipse, a lot of people just kind of revert back to cf dump, cf import, gets the job done, but probably isn't the most elegant way to do things, I guess. So, yeah, that slide was very long. So the Open Blue Dragon debugger, the goal of this was to keep it just dead simple and to give people that, you know, it's specific to Open Blue Dragon, but if you're using Open Blue Dragon, give you a tool that you can use really easy to debug your CFML code that's probably a little more familiar, doesn't dictate which ID you need to use, or that you launch an ID just to do debugging. And so it was designed to be just dead simple. Step one, you add a jar file to a project. All you have to do is download this plugin, put it in your project, and essentially you've done everything you need to wire up your debugger. There's no other configuration, there's no figuring out which port to point to get to your server. It's just literally you add this to your project, and then you have a debugger available to you that helps you avoid the cf dump, cf import stuff. Step two, you open your debugger in a browser. So this is a browser-based debugger as well. Once you drop that jar in there, go to your project name or URL / OpenBD debugger, and you see your code comes up on the left there. We'll see how this works in a second. But it kind of scans your files and gives you this, you know, debugger panel that you can use to debug your code. And then step three is you start debugging. Basically, if you click a file on the left there, it opens up your code in that panel. And then I'll talk about this on the next slide, but you can set breakpoints and do various things within the debugger. Again, just by adding a jar file and going to a URL in your browser. So probably the most important thing that you're going to do while you're debugging is set breakpoints. Perfect thing. And so that's done in the debugger. You just click on the left-hand column by the line you want to debug, and you set a breakpoint. And of course, breakpoints, if you haven't used debugging, are points that you're setting, saying, I want the code to stop here, or pause essentially, and I want to see what's going on. So that's kind of how a breakpoint works. So once you set your breakpoints, you hit the page in another browser tab, and you can see this is a blank page, because your code is paused at this point. When it hits a breakpoint, if other stuff hasn't happened to, you know, flush to the page, you'll see nothing here, but it's going to spin because your debug session has started. So then you can go to basically, it launches another tab in your browser that shows you what's going on in your debug session. So this is what your debug session kind of looks like. You can see, well actually this is the same screen, but showing it under active client sessions. You can see it pause at a certain point where I set the breakpoint. It actually stops right before the breakpoint. So these are probably kind of small, but you can see the code is paused at a particular line number before I set the breakpoint. And what that lets you do, of course, then is inspect all the variables. You can see exactly what's going on in all your code at that point where you set the breakpoint. So in this case, again, I don't know how well you can see this, but you can see all the various scopes that you're used to as a CFML developer at the bottom there. That looks like, you know, for all the world like a query dump because it is. So it's more familiar, it's in your browser. It's just kind of, you know, a nice way to do things. You can also drill into complex variables. So any of the variables that you have available, I did some just basic array and struct stuff, and you can drill down to see exactly what the data is in, the state the data is in for each of those at any point where you have breakpoints. So, and that can be helpful because a lot of times you're debugging stuff based on the state of data in a particular loop iteration or something like that, and it just gets difficult. Okay, then the other thing you have in the debug session is you can step over and just say I'm done debugging and go to the end of the request. So if you've set multiple breakpoints, you can step through each breakpoint and see, as I said earlier, the state of data, the state of all your variables at each point. And you can set multiple breakpoints and just kind of keep going and see what's going on. Also, it shows you the current file and tag stack. If you have CFC, CF includes, custom tags, etc., that can get kind of complicated. Mine's very simple because I just did a simple app to kind of take these screenshots, but it does show you in the current tag stack and some other query history and some other stuff, kind of where you are in your code, so you kind of get a sense of as you're going through what's happening. You can also set it to break on exception. So this can basically be the catch-all. If my code breaks anywhere, I want you to act like I put a breakpoint there so I can see why it broke. I just use that one all the time. It's like just, yeah, if it breaks, just stop and tell me why it broke. And these are just a few of the features, but again, it's just a handy tool, and I think anyways, debugging made simple. You just drop a jar file in your project, you open a browser tab, set some breakpoints, call up the request, code pauses, you can see what's going on, and that's pretty much all there is to debugging with the Open Blue Dragon debugger.